Welcome to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast, a podcast hosted by Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium. We aim to draw a map of the state of criminology across Europe through the words of contemporary criminologists. How is criminology defined and taught? Which are the main lines of research? Which are the main schools of thought in each country? These and many other questions are answered here by fellow researchers who share their vision on the development of criminology in their countries from its beginnings to the second decade of the 21st century. If you want to know and compare their stories, stay tuned.
Today we are interviewing Marie Torstensson Levander. Marie Torstensson Levander is Professor of Criminology at Malmö University. Professor Torstensson Levander's research interests are, among others, the study of criminal careers, longitudinal research designs, comparative criminology, study of sex differences, crime in urban areas, fear of crime, and crime prevention. She is the principal investigator of the MIND study, which is the abbreviation for the Malmö Individual and Neighbourhood Development Study. This interview was conducted on the 1st of July 2022. Marie, just as a kind of introduction, the goal of our project is to try to retrace the history of criminology in each European country, and we especially try to create a collective memory so that people after us have an idea how criminology came about in different countries. As you know, European countries are so different in terms of their history. Some have a very long history, some have a very short history, but also the history of different criminological schools of thought. So what we try to do is basically uncover and recreate this collective memory of European criminology, which is, of course, a very daunting task because criminology in Europe is so different. There's a lot of variation. So therefore, we interview several persons per country because we know that everybody has an own specialization and can put own emphasis. So in a way, our project is rather complementary to the ECO project, and it's not the same, but it has some similar components. So we have created a couple of questions for our podcast listeners, and we always start by asking our interviewees how they would define criminology as it now exists in Sweden. So I know it's a very broad question, but we are very anxious to know your opinion on how you define it and how it came about.
I think it's a difficult question to answer because it varies. I mean, it's different on different universities or different departments of criminology. But if I give you our definition at Malmö University to start with, we define criminology first, of course, as the study of crime, a multidisciplinary subject that addresses the development and causes of criminality at an individual as well as societal level, and further measures for prevention and alleviation of its consequences. So the focus is on the scientific study of crime and its causes, which of course includes interventions to prevent and contain crime as well as lessen its consequences. So there is also to some extent a part of a victimological aspect in our definition of criminology. So it's the study of crime, criminals, and victims.
And when you talk about criminal policy, crime prevention, you talk about crime secondary and tertiary prevention, or do you have a focus in Malmö?
You mean on the prevention part?
On the prevention part.
It depends on who you ask, so to speak. But we try to have two focus. I mean, social prevention, but also the situational prevention. I prefer not to not use this concept. I prefer the concepts of, I mean, the concepts that are influenced by SAT. I mean, to influence people places and people in places. But we are one group at the Department of Criminology in Malmö, and there are also other groups with other definitions. But I think we use both. We're working both with the social and the situational parts. Less with the criminal justice systems.
Just at the beginning for the listeners, SAT, situational action theory, so that everybody knows what we are talking about, the theory by P.O. Wikström. So it plays an important role in the way you teach criminology, if I understand correctly.
Yes, if you're asking me, yes, it is. And I'm very interested in theory and theoretical development, and especially in the situational action theory. Yes.
How? Because traditionally there was the Institute of Criminology in Stockholm, and then how Malmö came to develop its own program.
I got a position at Malmö University in the beginning of 2004, and I was teaching criminology in a program for social workers, and I suggested to one person that why not start courses in criminology, and he gave me the answer that no, that's no idea. No one will apply for that. Okay, so I just went on as planned, and some years later, I think it was in 2007, I was asked by our former dean if I was interested to start first courses in criminology, and after that a full program, and after that a master's program. So we started the courses on undergraduate level in 2007, and the first variant of the program started I think it was in 2009, and the master program a couple of years later. So I think the answer is that I was there and I was interested. I wanted to start courses in criminology in Malmö, and at that time it was the criminology was dominated by the criminology at the Stockholm University, and I think we can say that we are the second full department of criminology in Sweden, and there are only 2 departments of criminology.
And how many students do you have now? Because they told you that it was not going to attract any student.
No, he said that. We have a lot of students. I'm not sure how many.
Well, roughly
300-400. I think that the applicant each year are about almost 3,000 per year only in Malmö, and I guess there are as many as that at the other universities in Sweden. So it's very attractive for young people.
So you have numerous fixtures or something to eliminate the huge numbers of students, because I can imagine that if you allow everybody, that then you have to teach for thousands of students. And
we have, in Malmö we have 45 on the program. We have the program and we have the courses. And you can read the courses within the program, but you can also read the courses as they are. And I think we take 40, 60, perhaps 100 per year, 125 new students each year. Yeah, and then we take 30 or 40 on the master level.
You said something very interesting, namely that social workers were quite aversive in the beginning, or absolutely not convinced that criminology could be an added value.
Yeah.
Quite surprised, because I have also studied social work besides criminology, and sociology of deviance, and criminology was a part of it and has been a part of it for a long time. So what was the reason for the opposition?
I have absolutely no idea. I don't know why. I don't know. If we compare with how it is today at the program for social workers, they have no criminology at all. I mean, at that time they had a small course in criminology, but today they have nothing. And I think that it's the same at every university in Sweden.
Perhaps they are worried about competition in the labor market. For example, I had a discussion this week with, in Switzerland, social work is not at the university degrees, what we call, like in German, the Hochschule, the Haute École. Now, sometimes call themselves University of Applied Sciences, but it's like a different path. And the person responsible was telling me, yeah, in the services, in the probation services, there are a lot of your students in kind of our places. In his logic, social workers should be there and are there in other cities of Switzerland where criminology is not taught, and we are occupying a little bit that space. Maybe this could explain, at least partially, the reluctancy.
Okay, well, I can add that Malmö University at that time, it was not a full university, but as you say, a högskola.
Okay, exactly. The same system. Yeah, we have it here. This varies a lot in Europe. For example, in Spain, everything is a university career. Nursing is a university career, and in other places it's not. It's not. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but there is, at least here, they are more connected to the labor market.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that perhaps that's an answer to your question, because criminology is not connected to the labor market.
Exactly.
No.
Here there is something there that doesn't fit completely in that logic. And I was checking that Malmö has 300,000 inhabitants.
Yeah, about.
And you have 3,000 candidates per year. It's not bad, eh?
They are not from Malmö, and then we have
I know.
university a couple 20 kilometers from Malmö. I mean Lund University, and they have also a program in criminology.
So criminology programs are booming.
But I think that the program in Lund is more, so to speak, a program in the sociology of crime. Very different from our program.
Do you think there should be some kind of standard for these programs, because the variety across Europe and even inside the same countries is quite impressive, eh?
I don't know. I mean, who should decide what standard? Partly it is some kind of standard. I mean, they shall have theory, they shall have methods, they shall have applied criminology, etc. But I mean, dependent on what university, the programs are quite different.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
In most cases, I'm almost constantly against fixing strict rules, but I was interested in your idea. For example, in Spain, which is a very in terms of education, some part of the education is very centralized, even if they have the autonomies. And so if you want your program to be recognized as a program with validity in the whole territory, for them that is very important. There is a corpus that must be taught, and I'm not very convinced about that way of doing. Then of course they give you titles of the branches, and then you can adapt them. But it's very easy nowadays, when science is advancing so quickly, to be outdated. You know, they have a part of extra courses that you could add, but in my case, I don't think it's very good to fix exactly what is the content. And at the same time, I am aware that people with completely different backgrounds call themselves criminologists.
Yeah, that's right. We have completely different backgrounds. No, not completely, but I mean, I noticed that one of your questions concerns, so to speak, the old generation in contrary to the new generation, and it's a bit different. I mean, I'm a sociologist. I have my PhD in sociology. I have sociology and I have psychology, but I have absolutely no criminology. But today they have only criminology and perhaps no sociology or not a basic disciplines. And I'm not sure that that's a good way to go. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree, but it's not easy to find like a medium path, a place where you could have at least some core information. Sometimes can be also very ideological, and this is no good at all. So,
No.
yeah. So you mentioned Lund,
Mm.
Malmö, Stockholm. There are more centers, huh?
Oh yes, there's Örebro University. They have a program. They have a master program. They have a PhD program, which we also have since 2 years ago. So I mean, we have a full, complete education from the BA level to the PhD level in criminology, and we have that is a högskola in Gävle, a bit north of Stockholm. They had a program on the bachelor level, and I know they are planning for a master's program. And we had also a program it's called Mitthögskolan in Sundsvall, a bit up north in Sweden. But I'm not sure how it goes on that place. They had, as many other university, problems with the recruitment of teachers, because Sweden is a small country and we haven't produced so many on a PhD level yet.
That is also a major problem in some
Yeah.
countries. I mentioned Spain. They have thousands of students. It's a country of 44 million people. Sweden is 10 million, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Well, roughly. So they don't have teachers, as you mentioned. So you have someone who has studied criminal law and reads Handbook of Criminology and then teaches that, and that is not good. That you have some very good
new teachers from the student level.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's not the perfect solution, but
we try to solve it by having this truncus communis, so the common parts, which is somehow equal in all the Belgian, let's say the Flemish universities, because in Wallonia there's only the master program, but somebody who basically studied in Lieven can come work in Ghent, and the basic background is similar. So I think the larger the country, the huger the differences are between. I mean, maybe that's not correct. I'm just my gut feeling, but that's how I perceive it.
the larger the country, the bigger differences between.
Yeah, because there's probably local needs. I don't know, or because there's a lack of professors. Maybe that will change in the future. Of course, that's possible. Maybe the students, next generation, people who get a PhD in Malmö, and people who get a PhD in other universities will maybe have a more shared background. I don't know. I mean, how things will evolve. It's an open question, of course. But it's interesting to see that also the police is getting criminology programs. This is something very unique to Northern European countries, I think, because if you want to study, if you want to become a policeman in Belgium, it's just a very simple educational program, 1 year, and that's it. But I mean, I have the impression that both in Norway and Sweden, that the educational programs take 3 years, if I'm not.
No, I think that in Norway they have a 3-year education, but in Sweden it's 2 year and perhaps it's 6 months practice, but they are working on a full bachelor education even in Sweden. I mean, if the police have a criminological their education in criminology, and I mean they need teachers as well, and there is a competition between the university educations and the police education, of course. And in Malmö we have both. We have the police education and we have the criminology department. And we have difficulties to teach the police officers because we haven't teachers enough for our needs. So,
Okay.
and then you have a police education in Stockholm, in Umeå, in no, not in Örebro, in some other places. And all of them shall study criminology.
I was once at the police academy in Stockholm because they have a good library of criminology.
Yeah, I
and
know.
The librarian is connected. I mean, when I was studying in Switzerland, I worked at the university to pay my students in the University of Fribourg. So I was always a little bit connected to the world of the librarians. And when I was at Rutgers, I was placed in the library, my office. And Phyllis Schulze, who was responsible of the library of Rutgers for so many years, she put me in contact with this network of librarians in criminology, criminal justice, sometimes forensic sciences. And they have this network in which when someone is missing a paper, they connect. And maybe 10 years ago, a little bit more, they invited me to give a talk at their conference, which was in Stockholm. It was very interesting, the place, and I was surprised because they had this nice library. Of course, now the digitalization changed everything, but I have the impression that they must have been quite relevant. Huh?
Yes, I know, because I worked there for 10, 12 years.
Ah!
Yes, I got my PhD in 1987, and I got a postdoc position at the police academy in Stockholm for 6 years. And they decided to move the research unit at the police academy to the National Swedish Crime Prevention Council 10 years later. And then I moved to this part of Sweden.
Ah, this is the connection. Wow.
So I can tell you, when I started to work at the police academy, they had no criminology there either. So in a way, I started that
So you were the reason I went to that police academy.
But when was that?
I was in 2000. I can check it, but it was later. But you started criminology. They developed the library because you pushed them to develop it. And then I was invited there. That would never have happened if you haven't launched the criminology department there.
Had not.
I will check the date exactly. It's more than 10 years ago, but I can tell you.
In the meantime, I'd like to ask a question about the differences between the programs. It's probably hard then to say that there is a dominant paradigm. When I looked at the situation in Belgium, I don't think there is peaceful coexistence, so to speak. I mean, people choose what they want to, but there are other countries where some paradigms are quite dominant and others are just studied very, briefly or not given many attention. I don't know, maybe it's difficult to oversee the whole situation, but is there some kind of dominant way of conducting research? And I mean both theoretically and methodologically. That's also a very interesting way of looking at differences between countries. For example, differences in methods, quantitative versus qualitative theory testing versus social reaction. Is there any dominant paradigm in Sweden overall?
I think that, as you mentioned, theory testing, I think that the department in Malmö is more into that, the theory testing part, than any other department in Sweden. Methodologically, I mean, and you know that as well, I think that in Malmö we are more quantitative than perhaps in Lund, perhaps in Stockholm, even if it's changing a bit there as well. If we look at Örebro, the criminology and especially the research in Örebro is very influenced from psychology and even biology or sociobiology. And of course, that depends on who are working, who the researchers are.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in Lund, I mean, they are more, as I said before, more into the law and the sociology of law, perhaps more traditional sociology.
Sociology of law is kind of like disappearing in many countries. At least that's my opinion.
Okay, yeah. Perhaps it's the same in Sweden, but in Lund it's not disappearing.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, this was something that, I mean, when I was a student, we had many courses, at least 2 on sociology of law, and basically completely disappeared out of the curriculum. I mean,
Okay. We
so,
don't have it in Malmö, so.
mm,
But we are so close to Lund, so I mean.
mm,
But we are close to Lund, but we are very different,
yeah,
even methodologically. So, I mean, they are more qualitative and we are more quantitative.
especially longitudinal studies. That's something which is probably studied in Malmö also because of the kind of data you have collected,
Yes.
the research data.
Yes.
What strikes me is of course not only the fact that you have had the Minds project, which is actually a way of testing in another city the basic ideas of the Peterborough study in Cambridge, but you've also been involved in other longitudinal studies, and I don't think many people know that longitudinal studies have a long tradition in Sweden.
Yes. Because of our personal security numbers, I guess, it's very easy to study people from official records in Sweden, and that was the dominating kind of longitudinal studies. I mean, the official records-based study, and I did my PhD on one of these, and it used to be called the Project Metropolitan, and it was a longitudinal study of 15,000 people born in 1953 and living in Stockholm.
But this is quite exceptional. I mean, if you look at, for example, Belgium, it's extremely difficult to get high quality data. It seems that, yeah, some countries have a long tradition in gathering data,
Yes,
which allow for panel studies. And I think both Sweden and Norway are exceptional in terms of their capacity of collecting data.
yes, but that's why because we have these records or registers of high quality.
In Belgium, there is this kind of discussion going on. People start realizing it's necessary, but it has long time been ignored because of the ideas of privacy and how to connect data from different sources. In many countries, data collection started later. There was this dominant influence of critical criminology, or at least some kinds of critical criminology. I don't want to generalize, but there was the kind of 70s Marxist idea that it's not important to do this longitudinal study. It's important to study the social system. While you can, of course, also study the social system using all kinds of data. But I mean, that was the culture of the 1970s. Was probably different than in Sweden, or not?
I'm not sure. I mean, even in the 1980s, you could hear that the longitudinal studies was of no importance. And it was the social systems that was the real thing, so to speak. But I think many people who had that opinion then, they have changed. and they are into the longitudinal studies now. Okay.
What made them realize that it was also important that they saw the light, or?
I don't know. Absolutely no idea. Good data.
I think that's very important. I mean, without good data, you cannot properly test theories, of course.
No, and that's why we, in a way, have left the old longitudinal studies and started, for example, MINDS, which is based. I mean, the purpose is to test theory. And
I have a question about that. By the way, it was in 2008 that I went to Stockholm to this conference of librarians. I don't know how is the network working, but they are still active, but they have less resources to meet. But talking about these longitudinal studies, perhaps the reason why they are not well known outside of Sweden is probably because the results were published in Swedish only.
Yeah, that's a good point. No, but I remember my old advisor, Carl Gunnar Jansson, who was the PI for the Project Metropolitan. His policy was to first present the results in Swedish or in reports, in the report series, and after that you could write manuscript for journals. And I don't think that was a good policy.
Not at all.
No,
I agree.
We had the same policy, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's very difficult for scholars in Europe to recreate the history of different schools of thought, because everybody was writing in their own native language, and as you know, it's quite difficult. I mean, and quite different in Europe compared to the USA, where everybody just.
But we didn't write it in Swedish, but we wrote it as reports published in Sweden, and that was they were not distributed outside outside Sweden.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
But don't you think that there is a place for a couple of PhDs in history or a project to recover that? Because when you write down the history of Europe, everybody talks about the Cambridge study for delinquency development, a model. Yeah, okay, perfect. But there were other things going on, and nobody knows about that, and nobody writes about that or shows something. Because in other countries, like for example Switzerland, they are now elaborating the statistics on recidivism based on cohorts. They are taking, because it's very difficult in Switzerland because of the high percentage of foreign population. You cannot measure recidivism if the person is no longer in the country. So they are taking the persons born. And I mean, we are probably going to repeat some of the mistakes that the first researchers did, and we could be learning how do you use these official records, which were the things that were interested to discuss. I think there is a hole there, and especially for someone who wants to write his PhD on the history of Swedish criminology, is very bad known outside Sweden. And the Nordic Research Council played a major role in the development of criminology in Europe. Nobody knows all that.
There is a good publication, I think it's translated to English, on the Project Metropolitan. Nowadays it's called the Stockholm Birth Cohort. And the title is Born 1553, or Born 1953. It's a more popular science, but it's a very good presentation of the Project Metropolitan and in the context of Sweden at the time when the cohort was raised. It's very, very interesting. It's written by Sten-Åke Stenberg, who's professor of sociology at Stockholm University.
Yeah, I see Sten-Åke Stenberg, yeah?
Yeah.
2000, published in 2018.
Yes.
Also in open access in European networks, but you see it has 14 quotations. Well, it's new, This sounds extremely interesting. Yeah, I mean, perhaps there is a need for an article that summarizes this.
It's not only about criminology. I mean, it's broader than.
Yeah, this is a Project Metropolitan. Yeah, it's very interesting. This, but I don't remember seeing a presentation at the ESC about this. Yeah, I understand that it's more general, but
More general sociologist. There are people in Stockholm at the Department of Criminology that they are working with data from the Project Metropolitan, like Anders Nilsson, Fredrik Sivertsson, if you have heard of him. They are working with this data and doing follow-ups. I think that you can follow them up to age 60, at least partly.
I can imagine that there is a lot of attrition. I mean, if you can already follow up people for such a long time.
Yes, and they are 15,000, and half is girls or females.
Yeah.
But it's not only boys.
Exactly, which is the main limitation of many of these first studies.
15,117. That's my PhD thesis. So and that was about drug abuse in the drug abusers in the cohort. But I had a doctoral student a few years ago who wrote about just only the female. It's called a female offender, and it's 3 or 4 papers are based on the Project Metropolitan.
What kind of drugs did you study?
You mean in my thesis?
Yeah.
I didn't study drugs. I studied drug abuse, but I had 3 sources of drug abuse, and one of them was if they had injection marks or not. And I guess that was a result of heroin or perhaps central stimulants. And then I had records from the social services, and that could be everything.
Yeah.
I had a third one as well, but so I mean, it wasn't the kind of drug that was my interest, but it was rather the way you became a drug user. So I tried to develop some kind of theory, which, if I look at it today, it reminds a little bit of situational action theory, but it had no name. But it was, in a way, the same idea.
Maybe because of the general influence of the grondverbränner.
And at that time, it was by Travis Hershey and the social bonding. And I tried to test whether social bonding was a better outcome than social learning theory, etc. I mean, that's what they did. And what we did at that time. Or strain theory. I mean, could we find a direct effect from social class to drug abuse? And no, the answer was no, I couldn't. So, I mean, that was the 80s.
But it's interesting that, I mean, you already showed in the 80s that there was no real social class effect, and still, especially in some countries, I think Belgium is also such a country, Sweden with their social policies definitely, and Norway also. The emphasis on social class as the most important variable which explains everything. That's this obsession. It's almost like an obsession. I'm not saying it's not important. Maybe it's important for other reasons, health outcomes. But I mean, what's the reason? Do people ignore? I mean, do politicians ignore research or?
Yes, they do. It doesn't fit into the ideology that social class has no effect.
So it must have
it must have an effect, yeah.
Okay, so otherwise your study has some methodological flaws if it does not show the result. I think this is very, I mean, I've also had many discussions with people on social class. I did my PhD on neighborhood effects, and there were also no social class effects. I mean, and if there was a correlation, it was a very, very tiny one, which does not, it wasn't really worth mentioning. But I mean, try to convince policymakers of some results, and you get into these ideological clashes. That's very interesting. And I mean, I know you've also done a lot of work on policy, prevention policy. Was it possible to try to get this knowledge in prevention policy, or also in vain?
It's very hard to put that into practice.
Yeah.
I used to, if I, for example, give a lecture for practitioners, I used to show them one of P.O. Wikström's slides of the correlation between social class and self-reported crime on the one hand, and the other is the correlation between crime propensity and crime, and it's so clear. But I don't know why it's so hard to accept.
Maybe the differences between classes have decreased, and some people still think that these differences are so huge. I don't know, maybe because of ideology, they don't look at data, and they have this, I mean, fixed ideas on what class should be. I mean, I think the preoccupation with class, that's probably one of the, I'm not saying largest mistakes, because I think you need to study it before you can actually say something about it. But the difference between results and what people do with this, I mean, a very tough one. I mean, so it's probably one of the key challenges for criminologists in Europe, everywhere. I don't know. Some people are holy believers.
Yeah, I think they still are, even at my department. There are some believers in that still.
Well, in the Nordic countries, but that was in Norway. There is this documentary called Brainwash. I can tell about this sociologist who goes to different departments and asking about general questions. He talks a little bit about violence. He talks also about gender, and gets these explanations that has nothing to do with what science shows. And then he goes to see Pinker and many other persons, and that was 12 years ago, and I don't see a change, even if this was denounced and shown. But there is a distinction. So okay, it was good to learn that. So Sweden became more punitive when the rest of the world was becoming less punitive.
Yes.
And based on what you learned from these people, why they became drug abusers, is it a good idea to criminalize their behavior?
Probably not. I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm always surprised about how there is no connection. The same thing that you were saying. There's no connection between. There is an empirical knowledge. I mean, your PhD was there. More research probably was there. Nobody dares to do something. And Jerzy Sarnecki told us the other day that when Ruth Dreyfus, who was one of the politicians in charge of the Swiss criminal policy, Swiss drug policy, got the Stockholm Prize in Criminology, the Swedish ministry was not present at the ceremony because you're sending the wrong message, so.
That's important, to send the right messages.
Yeah, exactly. And no, I was wondering, these are the main things. Also, there is a lot of discussion now in Europe about in some countries, not in the whole Europe, but for example in Spain, about criminalizing the clients of prostitutes, criminalizing sex work, following the model of Sweden. In Switzerland, it's completely the opposite. It's legal. They pay taxes.
Oh, okay. You mean the prostitutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's completely different. People talk about Europe or Western Europe and like something similar, and it's so different. But I know you have not, as far as I know, you didn't do research about this topic and of sex work and that, because I'm also interested in knowing if there is some research supporting the idea that criminalization brings something good. I don't know.
When I was a student, I did some research on this in a quite big project, but we'd made direct observations of prostitutes on the streets, on the street level. But I mean, that had nothing to do with the law and the legalization, and it was more a question of the street life.
Yeah.
But that was a long time ago. It was in the late 70s.
Yeah, but this is interesting because if you criminalize, then what happens with these persons? I mean, I'm always surprised because it's taken as a models in some places, and I haven't seen research, but I thought that maybe I'm missing it because it's in Swedish or it's been published in places I do not read, and so.
There is some research on prostitution at the Department of Social Work in Malmö. There are some people doing research on that, but I'm not aware of that. But I know that there is something. But that's not criminology because that's social work. So
Exactly. Yeah. I was surprised. There is also a tradition of Sweden of exporting criminologists. One case is P.O. Wikström, so we already discussed with him. Another interesting case is Ulla Bondesson.
Yeah.
And she made her career in Denmark, unfortunately, but she died relatively young. Did she have any impact in Sweden at the same time when she was in Denmark? Or did she make a career completely outside?
But you know, Denmark, I mean, Ulla Bondesson was in Lund, and it's so close to Denmark. So, I mean, it's today you can drive in half an hour. And at that time you had to take the ferry, but I mean, it's very close. So,
okay.
so I don't know. I mean, I was quite young when she was active.
Yeah. I saw that she was in, for example, in the group of persons that were editing Crime and Justice with Michael Tonry. So she had some international
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, presence. But I was wondering what if she played any role in the development of Sweden. I have the impression from what we've been discussing is that it's in the last 20 years that criminology exploded in Sweden. Eh?
Yeah, exactly.
So there is this change from Swedish to English for the publications. Eh? What could be the cause of that?
Shall we? I remember that my former advisor, Carl Gunnar Jansson, he asked me when I started to write my doctoral thesis, and he asked me, shall you write it in Swedish or in English? And I said, I don't know. And then he said that if you write it in Swedish, only 5 persons will read it. The advisor, he, and the committee, and the opponent. So his suggestion was write it in English. So perhaps 2 more have read it. I don't know.
And you wrote it
In English.
in English.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the opponent,
Yes.
which institution is that one? And how does it work? Because it's not every country has that. I have seen different things. Like basically you have the PhD in front of the jury. In the Netherlands, there are also two, a godfather and a godmother of the PhD candidate who are behind it. Yeah, and then there is a person who comes and they only talk for 1 hour. Someone comes, knocks, there is the master of the hour, I think it's called, puff, and then it's hora est, 1 hour and finish. So how is it in Sweden?
When you defend your thesis, you have an opponent, and that person mostly is at least an associate professor or an expert on the topic. And that person, either he summarizes the thesis for the audience, because, I mean, there is an audience, or does the doctoral student summarizes it. But after that, the opponent discusses the thesis for how long he or she wants. You can theoretically do it for 3 weeks, but I mean, it's mostly for 1.5, 2 hours. So that's the first part of the defense, a discussion between the student and the opponent. And after that, the committee or the examination board, and they are mostly 3 persons, at least minimum associate professor. Then they can ask questions to the student if they want to, and they mostly do. And after that, the audience can ask questions.
So it can be very long.
Yeah, it can be very long, but 2-3 hours.
2-3 hours. Okay. It's interesting. Do you wear something in particular?
No, nothing.
Okay. That's interesting. And then another thing that you mentioned is victimology, in your program. In Sweden, victimology is it's let's say part of criminology, or do you have a tendency to develop it on its own?
Oh, it's mostly part of criminology. It might be even in the law programs, but mostly it's in criminology.
Okay.
And you can see that, for example, in Stockholm, I guess they started to develop the victimology at the department in Stockholm, and we have some people at our department. And you can also find them on law departments.
Yeah, some people say, and especially in the United States, that the victims movement somehow had like a negative impact on progressist policies, resocialization of offenders by placing the victim in such a strong place. I don't know how it is in Sweden, if these movements of defense of victims are important. For example, in Switzerland, I would say that they are not so present as in the United States.
I think that they had been more present in Sweden than it is today. From the late 70s, during the 80s and the 90s, but perhaps they have disappeared a bit. I don't think they are so strong today, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I used to also give as an example to my students when I was teaching in Spain, maybe 15 years ago, a little bit more, 20. I remember that in Sweden, the students, I don't know if it was everywhere, that had a foreign background, had classes in their own language at least a couple of hours a week. And I thought that was a very progressive thing, to make the persons proud of their origins too. I have 2 questions about that. Is it still going on? And which are the results? Because now there is a lot of discussion about the gangs in Sweden. And these gangs are mainly from, let's say, non-Swedish persons. And I was wondering, because I thought you were doing the right policy, and yeah, I don't know how do you see it from the inside?
Yes, I think they are still.
Because I think it's the only country that, maybe there are other Nordic countries that I don't know, but I thought it was very progressive as a system. Yeah, I was wondering if this has been studied, the impact on that, on deviants, changed something.
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Here it's a big challenge too, because there are a lot of kids with foreign backgrounds. In the general population is 23%, and the schools is more. And yeah, I was wondering, for many years I said we should take a look. I always say we should take a look at what they are doing in Sweden. But yeah, I wanted to see if there is any if there is any evaluation. And about this problem of gangs in Sweden, was it something that you foresaw coming? How do you see it?
Obviously not. But I remember in the middle of the 90s or late 90s, P.O. Wikström and I wrote a report, or we did a suggestion of how to organize the local crime prevention or the national crime prevention on a local level, and we discussed the rather negative development of crime in different neighborhoods, and we also said that you must do something now, and that's more than 20 years ago, but no one cared. So perhaps if they have taken that serious at that time, no one did.
So all these policy recommendations, you're talking about everybody's, alla vårt ansvar.
Yeah, that wasn't ours. We wrote one recommendation.
On that program?
Yes, but after us, they did Allas vårt ansvar, which is a national, the governmental version of it, and that's another.
So they just took out the ideas which they liked, or
only small pieces.
Okay, that's frustrating. I mean, if you prepare documents for solid crime prevention and you submit it to the government and they just take small parts of it, I think I can imagine that. I mean, it's a lot of work to structure these ideas and to try to convince policymakers. It's probably the most difficult audience to convince. They have their own agenda for years, and
perhaps there were other people who convinced them about not to take our suggestion seriously. I don't know. Been like that?
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
that's possible.
But from what I see, you are doing an effort to communicate also with the policymakers. Well, it's not the case everywhere. This is a report to the government, or is a publication that you did? This program, how did you publish it?
We did first. We made a report for the government. That was the first one. And when we understood that they will never accept this, as we thought they should, we published it in Swedish as a report in a research report series that we had on at the police academy in the research unit. And we also published a summary of it as a journal article in I don't remember it, European Journal of
Policy and Research.
Yes, exactly.
There, yeah.
It's published there as a short version. I think it was published in 99 in a journal, 98 or 99.
I mean, if you think about the ideas 20 years later and nobody does anything with solid, motivated, theory-driven ideas, I think, well, it's just a bit frustrating. It's
a bit frustrating, yes. But you shall never give up. But even the Ministry of Justice said in an interview a couple of months ago that we missed something 20 years ago. We are too late on this.
Okay. But it's never too late.
Yes, exactly. Never too late and never too early, never too late.
Sometimes I use it as an excuse.
I can see the frustration. If you prepare something, it's not used, and then you see the results. It's quite so. So there was this research being done also at the police, this research unit.
Yep.
It's quite interesting to see how it was organized, research in Sweden. Now I was wondering, the other thing is this change towards publishing more in English. It has to do maybe with the European Union, with the more integration of Europe, with the fact that crimes are becoming, there are no more any borders, because you have seen this change, you live this change from when you started criminology and now. Which would be the main difference? How did crime change in your lifetime?
It has been more violent, of course.
So you have the perception that there is more violence, because this is the main question. When you look also at the 60s and the 70s, I mean, the gangs of bikers, one has the impression that it was not completely a paradise, that there was something violent going on. And so the question is the society that is more sensitive? But you have this perception that is more violent. Okay, that's interesting.
I think there's a small group that is more violent.
Ah,
That group, I mean, perhaps it's it's an identical group, but it has been more it has been more violent.
yeah. It seems that property crime was very important when you were studying in the 70s or 80s, and
Yes.
now it is no longer, and maybe it reflects it, or it seems to reflect a real change in society. There is also the virtual world that arrived. I mean, it's an interesting time of changes for and challenges for criminology, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And several of the persons that we discussed with talk about this change from let's say from property more to violence, but it's not clear whether it reflects a real change or a change in their social reaction to crime.
But perhaps it's like you said, that we were more worried about, if I talk about worry about crime, more worried about property crimes, and as a woman, perhaps about rapes.
Yeah.
Not so. I don't think we discussed violence so much as we do today, and also, violent crimes against women. I mean, that discussion rised during the 70s in Sweden.
Yeah.
Especially regarding rapes.
Yeah. But you had your number of robberies. I mean, you call it the Stockholm syndrome.
Aha, you mean the bank robberies?
Yeah, the bank robberies.
I already forgot the bank robberies. Yes, that's true. Yeah, that was you don't have any bank because the banks have no money. So.
Exactly. So I just read in the newspaper that it doesn't happen anymore in Belgium. So maybe it will happen again. But I mean, banks have no money anymore. So changing circumstances.
Yeah. I mean, violent crimes and including robberies between young people. I mean, that's that it's not a new problem, but it has been rising in Sweden the last years, the 2 or 3 last years. I'm not sure we heard about that kind of crimes 40 years ago.
Yeah, 40 years ago, the image of Sweden was mainly, I would say, ABBA. We had the impression, I mean, my impression of Sweden is cool people dressed in, at least the young generations.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I read about it, I saw, there were also, of course, as everywhere else, some problems, but
nobody locked the door. You could take the key from.
Yeah, there are some changes in society which are not easy to understand when everything seems to be improving, or could have been improving. It clearly has not. At one moment something went wrong, and it's not easy to find the reason. Maybe this interest in criminology is also a reflection of that. Or maybe we talk too much about crime.
I think that if I think about some of our students, I think that their interest in criminology also comes from movies, television, from the CSI series, and from all that stuff. Many of the students, they don't really understand that this is supposed to be a science.
Yeah.
I think it's something else for them. I only give a lecture on the first course when they comes to us, and I try to start with this discussion. I mean, what is criminology? Is it what you see when you look at TV, on movies and that stuff, or is it science? And I try to tell them what differs science from the other world. If you want to stop, go. You can stop now. That's what.
Yeah, but
I mean, some of them does.
Yeah, we have the same phenomenon that
exactly.
after a couple of months they realize that they are not going to do criminal profiling or something like that,
Yeah,
and
that's
they
enough.
abandon.
Yeah.
This changed a little bit with the pandemic and the recording of the classes, because some of these students thought, okay, I will hear the classes later, and so we had less people dropping out in 2022, for example. Now in 2021, 22, then more bad results at the exams. That's what we saw. But there
Okay.
is some confusion. Also, yeah, also in the places where they also teach criminalistics or forensic sciences, like in our university, there is even more confusion about this. Maybe there is one thing, Lieven, that is which are the challenges now for criminology. You have all these programs. Which is the future for criminology in Sweden?
Yeah, that's the only one. Although we started the discussion, but that's maybe something that we could elaborate on. Challenges are so different in different countries, different problems, different phenomena. What do you think about
I think
the case of Sweden?
there are many challenges, I think, for Sweden. But if we talk about the educational programs, I mean,
The education.
I mentioned that before. I mean, you need high quality teachers, of course.
Yeah.
And I can't say that we haven't, but we have too few of them.
Okay.
And I think we also it would be Sweden would benefit from to recruit teachers from other countries, as to create networks, international networks.
Okay.
Even for the educational part. I think that would be a very good idea. And we have our master program is international program. So we have students from all over the world.
Also from Belgium, because I know we have the Erasmus program.
Yes, also from Belgium, and I guess also from I'm not sure about Switzerland, but
I'm not sure we send people to Sweden. But this probably because we still do not have an agreement. That we have to check this, because
Okay.
if you teach in English, then it's
Yes,
much
we do.
easier. There is this limitation with the language, also
Yes,
for the
but
people who
teach
come
in
to Sweden.
English
Yeah,
on the
exactly.
master level.
Yeah, that's
We are-
perfect.
Yeah, and we are trying to at least give one course or perhaps two in English for the undergraduate level. But we are not there. But we are doing some. They are having some lectures in English.
Yeah, we are doing this as well. Just a couple of courses so that they get used to it.
Exactly.
I don't have the feeling that it works perfectly at the undergraduate level. It's very important at the master level, but
I mean, if you have the opportunity to recruit teachers from other countries, you must teach in English.
Yeah, but in some countries it's not so easy to teach in a country in a language that is not the language of the country for the basic education.
Perhaps.
For example, at the bachelor level, we must assure that the person can pass the exam in French, for example. So we should give the person the possibility to pass the exam in her or his own language. It's different at the master level, but this is also a big change, because I remember in the 1990s, nobody would have ever thought of teaching at the beginning of the 1990s of teaching in another language in the same country, or maybe for a conference, but not a regular course. And quietly, it's happening in a lot of places. That is also a huge change. I think in the Netherlands also the master programs are in English.
yeah, correct.
Okay.
So yeah, this is also a change It's interesting to see that. At the same time, you see a fragmentation of Europe in other aspects, but they are. I always think that Erasmus was the best invention of the European Union to put people together. So at least in education, it worked. At the political level, of course, we could discuss.
Okay. But the other challenge, I think, that's the research part. I mean, as I think I said from the start, that we need, at least at our department, we are, and at least some of us are very interested in research about the causes and causal and mechanisms. And I think that kind of research is lacking in Sweden. Perhaps it's the same in other countries, but
about the causes of
we want
delinquency.
that kind of research.
Yeah, I think it's lacking in many countries, and maybe because it's, I mean, people, when they hear people talk about the causes of crime, they make reflections of 19th century positivism or something. I mean, there must be something which makes people think, oh, we don't need this anymore. But of course, this kind of research has developed as well. I think this is an issue in many countries. I mean, there is an imbalance, and but of course you need to get people interested as well. I see this not only at the BA and the master level, but also if you look at the PhDs, the kind of PhDs which are actually produced, there are hardly any theory testing PhDs compared to others. I mean, procentual, it would be, I think, a minority, and that's a bit of a contradiction, because theory testing has really changed a lot compared to 20 years ago. I think this is a challenge in many many countries. So recruiting the people who can motivate
Young people, yeah. I won't say most of the research, but a lot of the research at our department, it's place-based. And okay, that's fine, and it lacks theory and quite descriptive. Yeah. And that's how it is.
I would say it's a general problem, because I've been in committees in different countries, and the only thing that is developing in some cases is there is more research on cybercrime, but there is a lack of development of theories, how to incorporate this kind of hybrid world in which we live, in which we can be in 3 different countries, but discussing at the same time in a virtual environment without leaving home, and how this changes what we know. Especially, I'm thinking unstructured and unsupervised activities. I think I agree that there is something lacking there.
I used to talk about this, or discuss this quite often with some of my colleagues. We used to say that one of the problems is that we lack science. Criminology has developed in a more, not populistic, but away from the scientific, from the discipline. I don't know, but we are often discussing this as a problem.
That's a very interesting word, a more populistic way. That I like that. I think I see what you mean. I mean, there is a multiplication. I was discussing with Michael Tonry when he launched it 50 years ago, Crime and Justice. He said, there were maybe 6, 7, 8 journals on crime. Now there are 100 and something, and 60 something that have an impact factor. This multiplication, everybody wants to publish.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very difficult to know what's important. So, for example, their role as Crime and Justice, an annual review of research. With Lieven, we discussed the possibility of doing this at the European level. Just having someone who looks at what's been published on theory, but because maybe there is something, but you cannot follow because there are too many publications.
And if you don't publish, no funding.
Exactly. So, but someone should try to see the unity in the diversity of things that are being done. in my opinion, when you say populistic, I say there's also a lot of activism.
Yeah, that's another problem. Yes. Yeah.
I am sure that this is no good for science.
It's more of a political. In Sweden, we have a program at TV. In Swedish, it's called På spåret. It's a competition between two teams, and they have to guess where they are going in the world. They are going to a city or something, and they look. You can follow the journey to that special city, and it's called På spåret. And the subtitle is "Where are we heading?" And we used that for a seminar, me and Robert, actually, and to discuss with our colleagues regarding criminology. Where are we heading? And is it toward the political or activistic or populistic style, or is it toward science? I'm not sure that we succeeded.
No, but we must stay optimistic.
Yeah, we must stay optimistic, of course. But we wanted to lift this issue. What should criminology be in the future?
We are at some crossroads, actually.
Yeah, I think so.
There are different problems. Also, the sophistication of some statistical analysis is such that you cannot follow anymore. You cannot. This I discussed with Travis Hirschi, in 2004. He had this book with Selvin about the first book in which they criticized the research conducted, an appraisal of analytical methods. It was published with two different names.
Yeah, I understand. I remember that.
Yeah, and he told me it would be impossible now for two. Selvin was already known, but Hirschi was starting. This is parallel to his PhD. It would be impossible nowadays to do such kind of thing. I mean, they show you the data, they tell you that there is this, blah, 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 and
basic crosstabs can sometimes be much more clear than sophisticated analysis.
No, they are needed, but at least sometimes you look at the basic figures and they go in some direction, and sometimes they tell you no, but the interpretation is the opposite, and this creates some confusion, and then you have a lot of, on the opposite side, a lot of qualitative research about the perceptions, and of course it's important, the perceptions, but we cannot do only that. We cannot do the perception, my perception, your perception. I don't know which, if you want to do something in the level of criminal policy, let's say, so have some impact on how the world works, I'm not sure that none of them are the right ways.
Do you also have this problem in Sweden that policymakers tend to look for new explanations for each and every phenomenon? And this is also killing science. I mean, then you create 1,000
explanations.
I don't know, I read it somewhere. It has become some kind of cottage industry. A cottage industry for each and every new phenomenon. I mean, wait until there's a new kind of cybercrime and you will have new variables. And
unfortunately, there are researchers who support that. But I think the need for advanced statistics, that's a problem among many of the young scholars. That's more important than the theoretical base or just statistics. You need to practice R and the practice, and it's not so important why you do it.
Exactly.
That is a problem. It's like, especially, for example, the people that come from economy, that they do these econometric models and they talk about the beauty of the model, it doesn't matter if it works or if it doesn't work, but look how nice it is, how beautiful it is. I was surprised discussing with them because they are always searching for data to run these econometric models, and then there is a relationship with abortion, legalization of abortion. There is a relationship with this, with that, and I mean these are simple correlations. And then they come with an explanation ad hoc once you found the correlation. I remember discussing with a student that came from economy, and she said, no, but I was taught that you must put everything in the database and run all the possible correlations, and then you start trying to make sense out of that.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, exactly. But then and some people then, and sometimes they even go and say, no, this is some sort of grounded theory, you know, and then it becomes impossible to have a discussion with the. I think that is the problem, that sometimes you cannot have discussions because the paradigms are different, and you cannot reach a point where you could discuss about that. It's the impression I have. And who would be for you like the father or the mother of Swedish criminology? Because we know that you played a role. Now we know that was good in Malmö and also at the National Academy. But at the level of the country, before
The history, you mean?
Yeah, before I know, before Henrik Tam, before that generation. I don't think there was a Lombroso in Sweden. I never found.
Actually, it was, but not so early. It was a forensic, a psychiatrist named Olof Kindberg, and sometimes he was a psychiatrist, and I think that I don't know if he started the Institute of Criminology, not the Department of Criminology, but the Institute. It was called an institute at Stockholm University, but that was in the, I don't know, in the 40s or 50s, together with social scientists. But that's a long time ago. I have a wonderful photograph of Olof Kindberg. I used to show that sometimes for the students, and he sits together with his staff in his white. You know, he was a doctor or a physician. So
with the white.
But that was the psychiatrist. But then we had Carl Gunnar Jansson, who was a professor of sociology at Stockholm University, and he was also a statistician. I mean, he was very interested in criminology, and he called the sociological part for the sociology of crime. That was his kind of criminology.
People in Sweden who have now become professors know. I mean, if you look at the numbers of previous PhD candidates, they must have had very large numbers, or at least that's my
professors.
Who became professors.
Yeah, that's because you can be promoted from. If you have a lecture, if you're a lecturer, you can be promoted to professor and get professors.
But Olof Kindberg, he was one of these, in Belgium we would call this the old social defense movement, 1930s. He talked about moral hygiene and this old vocabulary. We even have a couple of his books in our library. I mean, our historical part. His work reminds the work of Quetelet and the statisticians,
exactly.
the moral statisticians. So I think this was a movement across Europe. Yeah,
at that time, yes.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden the influence disappeared, probably because of the Second World War and the influence of, or the exclusive influence of pseudoscientific racial theories and so on. But I think this was, is it correct that he was also linked to the eugenics movement?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Because everybody was in the 1930s.
Yes.
Almost everybody. I mean, both from the left or the right.
Maybe he's a little bit too, because he's in the 40s, and the eugenics movement in 1939, for example, the United States, the eugenics record office that they had, they closed it in 1939 with the invasion of Poland, and they realized what the Nazis were doing. And I think Davenport got a PhD from one university in southern Germany already in the Nazi period. And then there was something, it was like, okay, we don't talk about this anymore. We close it, and it's like never happened. So I don't know the age of this research, of this professor.
I'm not sure of his relation to that.
if he established the institute in the 40s, he may have grown with these
Yes,
ideas, but maybe not be very active because maybe he was too young at the time.
perhaps.
Yeah, I thought he was already active in the 1920s, but of course I can be wrong. I mean,
yeah, that is a period where we don't know a lot. The between the First and the Second World War.
it's a very unknown period. And
yeah, Radzinovich, in his memories, he goes through Europe after World War II and looks at everything is a little bit destroyed, but it's not clear what there was before, because Radzinovich is mainly talking about, Radzinovich also met Ferry, but that was at the beginning of the century because he was relatively old. So I think he's talking about before World War One. There is a period there in which we don't know a lot. Also, we don't know, I mean, I do not know how the universities worked during the war. The classes continued, people were going there. There are data I have seen in some countries, because I checked for this. You see numbers of persons receiving diplomas, so something was going on. But it's not completely clear, because it's already the 1930s, but the men were mobilized, young men. So it's something. There must be something probably in history that I do not know. But I'm always. I thought it mainly during the pandemic, because we continued teaching during the pandemic. And in Ukraine, the classes are still going on, which is something impressive.
Yes,
but now you can do it because, of course, you can do it online. I mean, what happened at that time for me is a mystery.
Food for thought.
Yeah, food for thought. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Marie, I don't know if you want to say something else, something that you think you missed, that you wanted to.
Final words.
I guess I missed a lot of things, but it's okay.
No, but something that you wanted to discuss, and maybe we took you through a different path while we were discussing.
It was a couple of months since I used Teams or Zoom.
You're no longer used now.
No, we don't. You have to concentrate a lot to.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, but this is, my impression is that it is good, because if you are doing an interview with the lights there and there is more pressure. Well, if you are at your home, then at one moment you relax and you tend to forget a little bit that there is a camera and that is being recorded.
Yes, yeah.
The results, I mean, the interviews that we did were quite nice. Some are quite nice. Of course, then you need to have time to hear them or put them at double speed. You can also do that, and then it goes quicker.
Just like students do when they are learning the exams.
Exactly.
They're binge watching at double speed.
An interesting idea from you about to write about the Swedish longitudinal studies, and with focused on criminology and deviance, perhaps.
Exactly. I think there is a need for something like a comprehensive article, a review. Like I was saying, this was done and it is published here and here and here, and you can collect, so that something that people can use, because even in the books about longitudinal studies, they only take like 6 or 7.
True. Perhaps we shall think about that.
Okay.
Good, very good. I even think that I'm not sure, I have to check again, but there was a volume of Crime and Justice only about Scandinavia. Right. Crime and Justice in Scandinavia, edited with Henrik Tam also. And I'm not sure that in that book is an issue of Crime and Justice. I have to check, but I would say 90% sure that there is not a chapter specific on longitudinal studies in Scandinavia, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I'm absolutely sure that you are right.
Okay. Okay.
No further comments.
Well,
Okay.
Marie, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I'm
That's-
going to pick up my daughter and her family. They are coming from Paris.
Okay.
Nice. Okay, Marie, thank you very,
Okay.
very much.
See you.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Hey.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for following Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast. This podcast is edited by Eduardo Coco from the University of Lausanne. Our theme song is Seagull's Night, Noche de Gaviotas, composed by Gustavo Cantero, arranged by Tato Germano, and played by Tato and Gustavo with the voices of Sasha Conte and Alejandro Turco Gujot. Your hosts are Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University in Belgium and Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Cheers and see you soon.